Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Shannon, and this is my first documentary. I used Yahoo as a search engine. The topic, CPS custody, child dies. You can see here I got 12.1 million hits. By comparison, the atomic bomb on Hiroshima was 1.1 mil. Ebola in Dallas, 11.8 mil. Man walking on the moon was 7 mil, and the end of the Cold War was 8 mil. All are significant events, yet people are talking more about children in CPS custody dying. Let's take a look at the first 10 hits and see if we can get a flavor of what's going on. The first hit is Little Markel Collins' story, covered by Randy Wallace of Fox News. The article states Markel lived 3 years with her mother before CPS took her. 2 months later, she was dead. Place of residence, Houston, Texas. The second child's death is covered by Adam Sosler of Infowars.com. This is Alexandra Hill's story. This report states the father started noticing bruises on Alexandra while visiting her in CPS custody. It also says the pathologist identifies the cause of death as blunt trauma to the head. She lived in Round Rock, Texas. The third death reported by ABC15.com's reporter Nicole Byer. It's about a child named Apoliana Yanez. According to this article, CPS ruled the death natural causes. She had a blanket wrapped around her mouth. She was 3 years old when she died, and she lived in Goodyear, Arizona. The next one, number 4, is another article by Fox News. It's Jasmine Hall's story. She was taken from her parents by CPS who claimed neglect. This report quotes, CPS told courts the child needed immediate surgery, then waited weeks to perform it. The article also quotes, CPS documents state the death could have been preventable. She was 3 years old and lived in Houston, Texas. While not a part of this research, this author was made aware of a breaking ABC News story about Texas state custodians forcing young people into cage fighting. Let's roll that video now.
This is the Texas State School for the Mentally Disabled in Corpus Christi, Texas. A place where residents feared what would happen when senior supervisors went home and the night shift came on duty. Then it was time for what was called the Fight Club. Residents would be rousted from their beds by the night shift workers who controlled their lives and forced to fight one another. Here, one resident nearly smothers another. The staff recorded the events for their apparent amusement as they called out the blow-by-blow like ring announcers, declaring the winner. Staff members can be heard laughing, prodding the residents to fight. According to...
Okay, we're back. I think many of you have found that video disturbing. The sum total in the first 10 hits of the search is 4 children die, 1 in Arizona, and 3 in Texas. If Texas CPS is this dangerous, perhaps we should look at why these children are in protective custody to begin with. To do this, we start by examining one case in particular. It's case number DF1012461. This is the story of Verna Marcos Shannon. It all starts when we're living in one of 2 small towns in Texas, Granbury and Stephenville, both about 100 miles south of Fort Worth. In rapid succession, CPS investigates me 3 different times in 18 months. Virginia Bethel of Granbury CPS writes this letter. Based on the available information, it was reasonable to conclude that the alleged abuse or neglect did not occur. Stephenville agrees with Granbury CPS and makes these statements. Persons who had concerns during my previous investigation were people who had not had any interaction with Mr. Shannon in over 2 years. I'm wondering what might be the caller's motive. My son stays with me. My wife then leaves me for another, taking our son with her. She gets into legal trouble a few months later. This CASA report, quote, Marquito was removed from his mother's care when she became incarcerated. Additionally, this CPS report, quote, neglectful supervision by his mother. He's now in CPS custody, 100 miles from home. CPS doesn't turn my son over to me. Instead, they do the following. This is CPS internal email. Quote, the caseworker called Special Investigator Jennifer Gibson, my local CPS office, to ask about me. Miss Gibson stated she had the task of locating me on my previous case and that I've stayed in touch ever since. Melinda Escobar of CPS and an attorney representing CPS named Cindy Williams of Fort Worth testifies in court, quote, parent could not be located and therefore waives rights, and whose whereabouts are unknown should be and hereby waived as provided by this section. You can see here CPS is given temporary conservatorship. Here's the judge's signature. You can see here that the judge decided Fort Worth has jurisdiction in this case. My son is now 100 miles from home. I'm now visiting my son on a weekly basis at a Fort Worth CPS office. Our visits are supervised. The first CPS worker, Ed Coffey, releases this document. Quote, goal is family reunification. He also produces these reports. Marcos is happy to visit with father, and Marcos happy to play and see father. Ed Coffey is saying positive things about me, just like my local 2 CPS offices. Ed Coffey is replaced with a new CPS person named Miss Brennan. She produces these reports. Visits went well, and Marcos and Mr. Shannon appear to interact appropriately and affectionately. Just like my local 2 CPS offices and the first caseworker in Fort Worth, she's saying positive things. She's also replaced. You can see here CPS sworn statements. They request in Fort Worth Court services for me to include drug assessment, psychological evaluation, random drug testing, and individual counseling, but the Fort Worth courts deny them. CPS then, the case was transferred to Dallas and assigned to Supervisor Laura Wheeler's unit and caseworker Nicholas Hernandez. We are now in our second courtroom, 5th CPS staff, 4th CPS office, and a second city we've never been to. My son is now 150 miles from home. Lauren Wheeler of Dallas CPS testifies abuse by me was ruled, quote, reason to believe. Here are the signatures of Lauren Wheeler and the District Attorney Brenda Green swearing, quote, I hereby swear the following is true under penalty of perjury. You've seen the 2 letters written by my local CPS offices saying the opposite. Here are the 3 original reports. Number 1, ruled out. Number 2, abuse ruled out, neglect ruled out. Number 3, unable to determine. This is the total of all investigations against me. They all say the opposite of what Lauren Wheeler and Brenda Green are testifying. Nick Hernandez of Dallas CPS starts testifying my son is afraid of me. Quote, child pulls away from father during greetings. Quote, Marcos doesn't want father to hug or kiss him. Every time father cuddles with Marcos, he jerks away from him. Remember what the Fort Worth CPS said. The first one, Ed Coffey, Marcos very happy to go visit father. The second one, Jamie Brennan, the foster mother states Marcos looks forward to his visits and gets excited when it's time for a visit. 2 Dallas CPS internal emails. They don't want witnesses. Here, quote, no third party without a court order. And, quote, father continues to bring camcorder to visit after asked not to. They're doing more than committing premeditated perjury. They're engineering an environment to continue committing this felony in a systemic fashion. You'll see here later, the witnesses claiming my son loves me grows, but CPS Dallas doubles down every time. They continue to stand alone by testifying he is afraid of me. Nick Hernandez spoke with all family, and all are afraid of retribution if they get involved, unquote. CPS sworn testimony. Family have been contacted. Father, mother, and sister declined express concerns about retribution, unquote. Here's the signature of Lauren Wheeler and Brenda Green, notarized. I hereby swear the following is true under penalty of perjury. During pretrials, CPS testifies I was threatening the life of my sister on the phone. CPS's own internal emails, quote, father has brother, not placement option, afraid of father. At this point, my dad writes 2 letters. The first one to Judge Denise Garcia. Quote, the sentence mentions a sister. There is no sister. And, quote, never made statements about retribution. The second letter is to the bar. Grievance about CPS statements are, quote, deliberately misleading. All declined assessments did not. Family not contacted. Never made statements about retribution. CPS's own documents contradict their testimony. Quote, father willing to help. Neither Dallas CPS nor the DA ever tell the courts they have lied under oath about contacting the family, being afraid of retributions, or a threat against a sister that was never born. During the trial, they testify on this imaginary person's behalf and successfully lobby the courts to keep my family out of the courtroom so their testimony is not contradicted. Later, after the trial, CPS releases this letter, quote, court terminated Marco's father's parental rights. Mr. Shannon does not have a sister. A review of the case also indicates that CPS has no record of Mr. Shannon's sister. Miss Wheeler admits she made a mistake in using the term sister, unquote. The jury never learns my sister is a figment of imagination of CPS's Laura Wheeler and Nick Hernandez, the district attorney Brenda Green, and judges Mary Brown and Denise Garcia, and all law enforcement watching. Nor do they learn CPS and the district attorney's office have deliberately committed the felony of perjury when they testify. My family was not contacted. My father, sitting in the hallway during the trial, denied opportunity to set the record straight about a deliberate felony shown here, the threats against a sister, making comments about retribution, or a family never contacted, saw this and reported it to the bar in this letter. Quote, a parade of women who, leaving the courtroom, having given testimony for CPS, would exchange high fives, hugs, and cheers, more fitting an elementary school cheerleading tryout. My lawyer, Tom Nickel, is unable to do anything to stop this premeditated felony. CPS Stephenville's letter. No person who I spoke with, who had current daily interactions with Mr. Shannon, had any concerns about his mental status. Fort Worth CPS internal emails. Father, no major issues, no mental health issues. Nick Hernandez of Dallas CPS continues to testify, quote, spoke with all family. They all believe he is insane. This is a picture of Nick Hernandez, and this is a picture he posted on his Facebook page of his kids. Do they know what their father has been up to? The Dallas court now orders services. CPS sworn testimony. Court-ordered services, parenting classes, psychological evaluation, individual counseling, drug and alcohol assessment, random drug testing. CPS's own internal email, quote, do not suspect drug use. For counseling, CPS chooses Lovell Counseling. Here is the authorization letter. Lovell produces this letter. I completed the classes on May 3rd, 2011, and sent a copy to Nick Hernandez. Father is no threat to son. CPS's sworn testimony. Mark didn't complete parenting classes or individual counseling on September 2nd, 2011. Signature, Laura Wheeler, Dallas CPS, and Brenda Green, District Attorney, under penalty of perjury. That's 4 months after the counselor notified CPS I completed it. CPS monthly eval, the therapist is recommending reunification. So once again, CPS's sworn testimony, the department is now concerned with Miss Lovell's assessment of Mr. Shannon. The case is landed in the 303rd District Court of Dallas. The two judges are Mary Brown and Denise Garcia. I looked at all the cases filed that month in Dallas Family Court. There was over 1,700 of them. My source is the Dallas County Library. Here is their list. I am told by the staff that the cases are distributed randomly between the 5 judges. I examined Garcia's decision compared with the other 4 judges, and here's what I found. The first of the 3 tables shows the number of times Garcia gave custody of a child to the father compared to the mother. You can see, not once. The closest of the other judges was Lopez, who gave the father custody 14.3% of the time. The bias in Garcia's courtroom, mathematically, could not be greater. Texas Law 153.003 no discrimination based on sex or marital status. The court shall consider the qualifications of the parties without regard to their marital status or to the sex of the party or the child in determining the terms and conditions of conservatorship and possession and of access to the child. Clearly, Garcia is in violation of this law. The next table lists the frequency an injunction is filed by a judge against a parent, father versus mother, and each judge against each other. An injunction is defined as a court order stating parent can't see child at all, must be supervised to see the child, must have a third party's permission to see the child. The other judges for comparison are listed and show rarely or never file an injunction. Denise Garcia and Mary Brown of the 303rd file an injunction against a father about 40% of the time and almost never against a mother. One example, unrelated to little Marco's story, is case number DF1013382. Quote, there has been no child neglect or family violence by any party to this case, unquote. Now their decision. Respondent should be granted supervised visitation at a visitation center or independent organization until the court finds that supervised visits are no longer necessary. Here's the judge's signature. Mary Brown, Associate Judge, 303rd District Court, Dallas, Texas. For me, the last of the tables is the most disturbing. If the judge orders visitation, how many hours per month does the father get? You can see I divided this into 5 categories. Less than 5 hours, between 5 and 10, 10 to 25 hours, between 25 and 50 hours, and over 50 hours per month. You can see by comparison, other courts almost unanimously give the father over 50 hours per month to spend with their kids. Denise Garcia and Mary Brown stand out. They give the father 50 or more hours less than 70% of the time. They restrict the father to less than 5 hours a month over 20% of the time. The other judges very rarely give so few hours. This author is asking, does Mary Brown and Denise Garcia see a threat to the children the other courts don't see? Or are they simply trying to separate fathers from their children's lives? Texas Law 13.002, Best Interest of the Child. The best interest of the child shall always be the primary consideration of the court in determining the issues of conservatorship and possession and access to the child. Let's get back to Marco's story. Unknown to me at the time, 2 people produced these reports. The first, a medical doctor hired by CPS, documents bruises. One of them is 1 centimeter long to the left prefib, another linear bruise to the left anterior. He has 2 bruises, 2 to 3 millimeters in size. They're pinpoint in shape, and they're on the right prefib area. The second person is a psychiatrist who visits on a regular basis with my son, also hired by CPS. His report says Marcos continues to be focused on minor injuries. From my perspective, my son begins showing up to the visits with bruises that look suspicious to me. When I asked about the bruises, Nick Hernandez of Dallas CPS produces 3 internal emails. The first, quote, father is talking in circles. The second, quote, Mr. Shannon has questioned his son about make-believe stories about bruising and discoloration. The third, quote, Mr. Shannon approached Nick Hernandez about some presumed injuries on his son, Verna Shannon. Mr. Shannon was told by Nick Hernandez that the child didn't have any injuries and he needed to leave the building. CPS produces this letter. Department of Family Protective Services is committed to protecting children and families we serve. CPS sworn statements in court, quote, no injuries have been identified. Once again, signature of Lauren Wheeler and Brenda Green. Quote, I hereby swear the following is true under penalty of perjury. Nick Hernandez also produces these reports. Quote, father is hostile to CPS staff. Father keeps bringing a camcorder. Quote, visits canceled due to a camcorder. I tell the courts my concern. CPS emails, quote, CPS has utmost concern while in foster care. Mary Brown and Denise Garcia just waved me off, saying anything could have caused this. They have no concern for the safety or well-being of my son. Here's a CPS monthly evaluation. Quote, father hostile to CPS. Marcos has a bloody nose. I'm concerned about my son's safety. I call CPS headquarters. CPS produces this letter to me. Quote, you made a report to DFPS Abuse Hotline alleging physical abuse of Verna, and the allegation is being currently under investigation. Page 2, CPS is responsible for making decisions, including placement, visitation, and permanency issues. I encourage you to cooperate with CPS. Unquote. I'm now asking you, the viewers, is this a threat? Remember earlier the sworn statements from CPS about retaliation if my family gets involved? The one my family denies making? Dallas CPS releases this document, changing Fort Worth CPS goal from family reunification to, quote, goal is adoption of unrelated family. Channel 32 News did an investigation story on CPS and retaliation. Let's take a look.
Target 32 investigation takes a closer look at the state child protection system 1 year after we first raised serious questions about an agency that saw a dramatic rise in the numbers of children it removed from home.
We had to go to court just to air our initial reports after an attempt by the state to stop us from showing you what's going on. John Bold joins us with his latest investigation.
We are being swamped again with complaints, very similar to what happened last year. But we can give you an in-depth look at one case that exemplifies the things we are hearing in hundreds of complaints. Allegations of quick-trigger child removal with no proof of parental wrongdoing, and then retaliation against those who fight back. You are looking at something...
I didn't see him for 11 months, and it's devastating. It's like the hardest thing on earth you can go through. It's like someone close to you just dies. So
when she fought back, appealing the ruling, she says they took her other 3 children away and then briefly removed 14 children from her extended family.
The first thing that came to us and said was, well, you started an appeal. Nothing else.
She's just retaliating against you, you think?
Basically. My whole family, they retaliated. It ain't stopped there.
We tried to check out this allegation, but CPS won't talk to us about individual cases. Attorney Bob Bishop couldn't believe what he saw when he took Shank's case and reviewed this hearing that he says contains no proof.
There has to be some evidence of wrongdoing that has placed the child in imminent danger or has hurt the child, and a pattern of conduct, of that type of conduct, and that's not due to poverty alone.
He would come home and he'd say, you wouldn't believe this, you know, and he says, I just can't believe these stories I'm hearing. And then it happened to us.
That's right. Social workers have removed Bishop's adopted daughter from their home, too. Again, records in this case are sealed.
And they said, if you do not cooperate with us, we're going to take all your children and we're going to charge you with emotional abuse.
The suggestion that children are being removed from homes and hastily put up for adoption to make extra money for the state through federal adoption reimbursements. In the entire justice system, there may be nothing more gut-wrenching. Earlier, in part 1, we showed you how a woman lost her children in a 17-minute hearing with no proof of parental wrongdoing and only one witness, the caseworker. Now, a look at several other disturbing allegations, from fast-track adoptions just to make bonus money to special orders for white children.
Anyone that had an opinion that was contrary to their goal of adoption, that information was suppressed.
Look, we asked the woman in charge of the caseworkers what criteria is necessary to take children away from parents.
We have to be able to prove and swear before the judge that the child is at imminent risk of death, serious injury, sexual abuse, something that is just egregious.
But according...
Once again, we're back. CPS now files this motion, quote, all opinions of Mark Shannon's mental, emotional, physical, and state of mind from individuals not qualified to offer those opinions is granted. Here's Mary Brown's signature. CPS wants money. They file this motion in court, quote, request income tax statements, and, quote, The department requests the court to order the payments for the support of the child be continued after the child is 18 and extend for an indefinite period. Also, quote, payments of the support should survive the death of either parent. In plain English, CPS wants to inherit all assets if I die. CPS tries later to backpedal on the bruising. CPS internal report called the monthly evaluation. Quote, Nick Hernandez called Mark Shannon to discuss bruising. Nick Hernandez explained where the bruising came from, Marcos falling at the park. I draw your attention to the dates of these entries. The first two on this page are 2/21/11. The one where they say they called me is 2/23/11. Then the fourth one on this page goes back to 2/21. Now, I'm not suggesting how this out-of-date entry might have happened. I'm going to leave that up to the audience. I will tell you, I don't remember this phone call. Another internal CPS report, quote, the foster mom was concerned because she was unsure exactly how the bruises had occurred. I have more reasons to be concerned. This Dallas Morning News article identifies 5 children that were murdered from head trauma while in CPS custody in less than 16 months. It also says there are 31,000 children in CPS custody. That's a murder rate of 0.0125% per year, just counting the children who die from blunt trauma to the head. By comparison, this article quotes the FBI as saying 4.5 out of 100,000 people were murdered in the U.S. during the year 2012. That's a murder rate of 0.0044% per year. Children are murdered in Texas CPS custody at a rate 3 times greater than the overall average in America. This statistics, all methods of murder in America are counted, but in CPS, I only counted children under 6 years of age killed by caving in their heads. All these children showed 2 other things in common: significant signs of trouble before their murder, and CPS refused to step up to the plate and protect them. Sierra Lee Odom was one of these. This report says her mother was complaining about bruises while in CPS custody. CPS did not protect her. Sierra Lee Odom had bruises from head to toe, and they were in various stages of healing. She died of blunt trauma to the head at the age of 3. She was murdered in Arlington, Texas. Staying with the Dallas Morning News, the foster mom took Catherine Francis and her sisters to the hospital with bruises. She and her 3 sisters had been temporarily removed from the foster home only days before she was murdered. The home was already under scrutiny for the death of 2 other young children, both of which, and Catherine, died of blunt trauma to the head. She was murdered in DeSoto, Texas. Christian Nieto, this Dallas Morning News article quotes, the foster mom had at least 1 child die of blunt trauma to the head already. Christian Raymond Nieto was murdered. He died of blunt trauma to the head. He was 16 months old. This article states CPS was currently trying to take the Nieto's other child away. He was murdered in Corsicana, Texas. Remember little Alex Hill from the intro? This is Dallas Morning News. The foster parents had one previous abuse-related death, that of 1-year-old Guadalupe Rosales III. Also, the killer's own children reported they had been removed from their parents' care by CPS years ago. From the Houston Express paper, Alex was taken from her home after her father admitted to smoking marijuana. CPS placed her in the home of a self-admitted crack cocaine addict with multiple felony drug convictions. The natural parents immediately started noticing bruises on Alex. The article also states the medical examiner identified the cause of death as blunt trauma to the head. I wrote the Attorney General, then Greg Abbott, and Governor Rick Perry, as well as both Senators Ted Cruz and Corey Lynn Burton, asking them to review the evidence in this documentary. All declined. As little Alex went through her autopsy, Rick Perry went on national TV.
Education and the, what's the third one there? Let's see.
You need 5.
Oh, 5, okay. So commerce, education, and the
EPA?
EPA.
At the same time, Greg Abbott, the Attorney General, and obligated by law to review this evidence, and has refused to do so. He spent his time partying after winning the governor's office.
Thank you so very much to every single Texan for making this day happen. I can tell tonight that things are already looking better in the great state of Texas. And I said, we do it right in this great state of Texas.
According to this Austin Statesman newspaper, Greg Abbott gave CPS $38 million additional funds after he became governor. It then says 1 year later, as of April 2016, quote, CPS is doing worse, and the death toll is rising. This is Joshua Hill's daughter, and this is Greg Abbott's daughter. According to this Dallas Morning News article, Texas receives $256 million a year from the federal government, plus what they receive from the parents, so CPS will protect these children. With Dallas testifying, my son is afraid of me. The increasing severity of injuries CPS is denying exist. I want a third party to see us together. Dallas produces these 2 reports. Number 1, quote, no third party without a court order. And number 2, cameras will not be allowed. They don't want cameras in the visit or a third party to witness. I file this motion. Quote, provide a court order allowing third party independent of CPS to witness our visits and CASA to witness visits. CASA is court-appointed special advocate. The court's order, Lovell Counseling and CASA can witness visits. You can see here they're also ordered to have the visits at 8700 Stemmons Freeway, CPS's offices. Dallas CPS quotes the first CASA worker to witness my son and myself together. His name was Ryan Griffin. Quote, CASA worker reported to Nick Hernandez several times it is in the best interest to be reunited with the father. This CASA worker is replaced. CPS schedules the next week visit 100 miles away from Dallas in direct violation of the court order. Lovell Counseling sends a witness named Justine Arnett. She produces this report. Quote, I'd like to inform any interested parties what I witnessed on Friday at CPS office in Granbury, Texas regarding the case of Mark Shannon. I'm a counselor from Lovell Counseling Services in Stephenville, Texas. Quote, upon seeing his father from outside the establishment, I saw a very big smile on the child's face. He placed his hands on the side of his face as he walked in the door and approached Mr. Shannon. Mr. Shannon knelt down upon his knee and greeted the child with a big hug. Now this is how Nick Hernandez of CPS describes the meeting. Quote, child hid behind Nick Hernandez when he saw his father. Also, CPS produces this report. Quote, child still doesn't want to be with father. Laura Wheeler of Dallas CPS and Brenda Green of Dallas District Attorney's Office give this sworn statements about this visit. Quote, visit in Granbury tempted to bring third party, previously not authorized by the department. When told no third party witnesses, father became angry and used inappropriate language to Nick Hernandez and other CPS staff, witnessed and canceled the visit, and escorted father from the building. CPS is in direct violation of this court order. The next week's visit is back in Dallas. The original CASA worker who recommended reunification is replaced with a new CASA worker named Nicole LaBeouf. In this CPS document, Nick Hernandez reports, quote, CASA worker has reported repeatedly to the caseworker that it is in the best interest of the child to be with the father, but CASA worker informed caseworker that she doesn't want the child to go back to father. This is Nicole LaBeouf's website. This is her picture. On this site, she claims to be a lawyer who frequently lectures the bar on ethics and is a licensed professional engineer. I contacted the licensing department for engineers in Texas. They claim in this response to never have heard of her. Nicole LaBeouf sends the courts a letter with this cover letter. She says July of '09 investigation was ruled reason to believe that I physically abused my son. I have already shown you this is not true. Back to Nicole's letter, quote, referral to CPS by a hospital for neglect due to documented problems with Marquito's blood sugar that could be attributed to poor nutrition. CPS reiterates LaBeouf's statements in sworn testimony in court. Quote, Verna had been diagnosed with hypoglycemia due to poor nutrition from a Cook's Children's Hospital. Here are the documents Cook produces. They say the opposite. Quote, he is a well-developed, apparently well-nourished little boy. Cooks must have got wind of CPS and LaBeouf's perjury and faxes Nick Hernandez this letter. Well-nourished male. Here's the fax receipt proving that Nick Hernandez got it. CPS records about Cook's Hospital. Quote, nurse made referral. Doctor said referral inappropriate. CPS's own report shows they know Nick Hernandez and Nicole LaBeouf are lying. Here is CPS's sworn statements, quote, child not malnourished. And the intake report, no signs of malnourishment. Family we lived with are quoted by CPS in their reports as saying, when he was living in our home, he paid for all the food, and they ate out steaks, pork chops, and ate high on the hog every night. Nicole LaBeouf's letter, quote, the family has a history of domestic abuse. CPS reiterates this in sworn testimony. Quote, father violent. Father found to have violent criminal history, assault charges against a family. 1 year and 4 months prior to this, the district attorney of Granbury drops charges, quote, dismissed the above cause number due to insufficient evidence. Nicole LaBeouf of CASA, Nick Hernandez, and Laura Wheeler of CPS, and Brenda Green of the Dallas District Attorney never tell the courts they committed perjury, much less in a premeditated manner. Assaulting Hilda is a very serious accusation. Let's look at the evidence quickly. The original complaint, a police report from Granbury, quote, approached her from behind, pulled her hair, and struck her in the back of the head. In a pre-trial hearing, Hilda's sworn statements, hit in the arms and legs because those locations don't show signs of bruising. Continuing with Hilda's sworn testimony, she changes her story. Quote, she does have bruises on her arms and legs and on the shoulders. She showed them to police and can't explain why the police didn't record them. And she can't explain her discrepancies. Nicole LaBeouf, quote, obtained a police report in which she made substantially the same allegations against a later boyfriend with whom she lived after leaving Mr. Shannon. Nick Hernandez writes written response to this, quote, Hilda is upfront about abuse. Perhaps what's going on here is Hilda has filed so many identical assault charges against live-in partners that she, the DA, the courts, CASA, and CPS can't keep them all straight. Here is Denise Garcia's written request for Hilda to get out of prison so she can repeat this testimony to the jury months later. CPS reports show they did a background check on me. Quote, shows no hit for either parent as far as criminal history, unquote. In court, their statements are different. Here you can see, father behavior cause for afraid of life. He is aggressive and hostile, and there's a warrant for arrest for bodily injury with an illegal weapon. Here are 2 CPS monthly evals. The first, during the visit, father displayed an illegal weapon. The second, father brought another illegal weapon to the visit. Here you can see CPS admits the visits are canceled because of a camcorder. and, quote, father called 911 to enforce the court order. Here's the police report from that event. The police say, quote, visits canceled because of a videotape. Father told to leave the building, unquote. I'm not arrested. I'm told to leave the building. Visits are not canceled due to risk of threats or safety. They're canceled because there's a tape recorder. Their testimony in court continues, quote, wanted in Honduras for an illegal weapon for bodily injury to a person. After 2 years of complaining in court about an arrest warrant, they finally produced this. It's an affidavit of felony arrest written in Spanish. The warrant identifies Senora Shannon. They're looking for a female. I'm a male. In the translation, the gender changes to Mr. Shannon, a male. And both the names are not mine. For more than a year before this incident date, I was in the United States and never left. My passport shows this. CPS knows this as well. This might be why when CPS translates this document from Spanish to English, they remove the date of the incident. I always thought a translation was supposed to be an identical copy, just changing the language. Despite this, they filed this paper with Denise Garcia and Mary Brown, who have no issue with it. CPS then tells me in writing the name, address, and phone number of the foster family. It's David and Susan Augustus. They live in this house at 9744 Delmonico Drive, Fort Worth, Texas, 76244. We're now only a few short months away from the foster family reporting to Nick Hernandez. This child is no longer living in our house. The judge, Denise Garcia, changes the location of the supervised visits. Additionally, CPS will no longer witness them. She chooses forensic counseling. I'd never heard of them. Here are some of their reports. Quote, as the super and Marcos approached father, Marcos pulled away from super and ran to Mr. Shannon. Father picked up Marcos and hugged him. Marcos then asked his father to put him on his shoulders. Another report, Marcos was sitting on his father's shoulders again and put his head down on top of his father's head. Also, Marcos asked for more time in the visit. During goodbye, Marcos seemed sad and again asked for more time. Marcos is hugging father around the neck when he was told he is little Mark. Quote, after feeding fish, wanted to ride on shoulders again. Marcos wanted a picture of both of them and wouldn't answer if he still had last week's picture. Marcos stated he did not want to go home. Mr. Shannon repeated it back, asking Marcos, you don't want to go home? Marcos replies, I want to stay with you, Papa. Mr. Shannon did not reply. He put his arms around Marcos' shoulders and gave him a hug. I think there's no need to go through any more of these reports. They're all about the same. Nick Hernandez continues to testify, quote, child still doesn't want to be with father. A dispute starts to break out between the counseling service and CPS. Forensic writes 3 letters. The first one, I'd like to address the 4 concerns raised by Dallas CPS Nick Hernandez on November 1. I reviewed the visits with supervisor and it appears that none of these things actually occurred. Page 2, as I noted in these conversations, I would urge greater resource monitoring as it appears Nick Hernandez has extrapolated extensively. Letter 2, I wish to address recent complaints made by Dallas CPS Nick Hernandez and the ongoing difficulty I seem to encounter with Nick Hernandez anytime I do not offer complete agreement with his characterizations of issues or events. This also leads me again to request that Mr. Hernandez not contact the supervisor regarding his complaints, and especially that he not initiate adult conversation, such as complaints regarding the father, in the presence of the child in question. I have frankly had great difficulty in communicating with Mr. Hernandez, and my staff reports similar experiences. I have previously discussed this with Ms. Kimball, that I am not clear where Mr. Hernandez's hostility towards us is coming from, and would request that he cease contacting us. Letter 3. Finally, I wanted to address the concerns Mr. Hernandez raised with me, that the father, simply seeing the case aide, left the case aide too scared to continue transporting the child in question. This has continued to give me pause, as having been a CPS caseworker and occasionally acting supervisor myself, the tenure of such a statement seems overblown. The dispute between forensic and CPS becomes so bad that my attorney, Tom Nickel, writes this letter, quote, "Please replace Nick Hernandez." Here are the fax receipts that Brenda Green of the Dallas District Attorney's Office received it. Here's the fax receipt that my son's court-appointed attorney received it. The fax receipt that CASA received it. CPS and the DA refused to act. Nicholas Hernandez stays on the case through the end. He continues to pick up my son for the visits. Quote, "Nick Hernandez coming soon to pick you up," unquote. The state of Texas call him as a star witness, testifying, quote, "I was trying to control his mind," unquote. Cheryl Small was convicted of murdering little Alex Hill. She clearly played a role. What about the CPS staff that placed little Alex with this monster? CPS ignored the parents' desperate pleas for the abuse to stop, for the bruising to end. Instead, CPS put all their attention on pursuing money and threatening the father Joshua with jail time. This is the person who killed Orion Hamilton. Once again, CPS ignored the parents' pleas to stop the beatings. CPS refused. Do they share the guilt? What about the courts, the DA, and the police also sharing guilt for allowing CPS to use them as their weapon of choice? CPS should be running from them, not to them. The fact they spent their resources chasing money instead. Does this make things more clear? I'm now asking you, the audience, what is your threshold for lying? How often will you allow someone to lie before they lose all credibility? What is your number? Now, I'm willing to bet I proved premeditated perjury a felony so many times that you've lost count. Is this greater or smaller than your number? What about Greg Abbott's liability? He continues to refuse to look at any evidence. The damage he has endorsed cannot be fixed. Rather than jail time or capital punishment, he gives these civil servants a pay raise. If he turned over a new leaf today, is it too late? Should he be dealt with as a common criminal? And what crime would this be? U.S. Law 18-1002, possession of false papers to defraud the United States. Quote, "Whoever knowingly and with intent to defraud the United States or any agency thereof possesses any false, altered, forged, or counterfeit writing or document for the purpose of enabling another to obtain from the United States any sum of money." Is a forged arrest warrant, a signed sworn statement from CPS, as well as CASA's Nicole LaBeouf's letter, all intending to justify taking a child and receiving the $256 million, a violation of this law? Greg Abbott cashes these checks. Should Texas lose their federal funding for a period of time? U.S. Law 18-1201, kidnapping. Whoever unlawfully seizes, confines, or carries away and holds for ransom or reward, or otherwise any person. If two or more persons conspire to violate this section, each shall be punished by imprisonment for life. Have these children been seized legally, with all the premeditated perjury you have seen here? What about the fraudulent documents? What about a track record of replacing every person who didn't lie, keeping all liars for the duration, and calling them as star witnesses? What about the bias of Denise Garcia and Mary Brown? Is this illegal seizure? The clear statements that Nicole LaBeouf doesn't want Marcos to be reunited with me, even though she admits it's in his best interest. Is this an illegal seizure? I have shown you they want money. What if the victim is tortured and physically beaten and dies as a result? What is the penalty then? In Texas, the governor, Greg Abbott, thinks a pay raise, not jail or execution. U.S. Law 18-2340, the definition of torture. Torture means an act committed by a person specifically intended to inflict severe physical or mental pain or suffering upon another person, which is in their custody or physical control. This article states a federal judge has ruled in 2015 that the abuse and death rate is so bad it's a violation of the 14th Amendment, where we're supposed to be free from harm while in state custody. The judge has given Texas 250 pages of recommendations to fix the problem. Texas is fighting every one of these, quote, tooth and nail, rather than cooperate with the courts, and the death toll is rising. The simple fact that courts are the weapon of choice. They are welcoming CPS with open arms. This is the most damning proof there is a conspiracy to defraud the American government of money. If this isn't kidnapping, can I, the author, then conclude the amount of perjury you have seen here is below your number? Is it fair to judge you by this decision? Perhaps worse, the fact that after this documentary has been released, Texas doubles down once again and stands behind their behavior. Is it fair to conclude Texas will continue this behavior and all peaceful resources have been exhausted? What about the general population of Texas? When I ask about this subject, they claim they don't know anything about it. Is this possible with all the media coverage I've shown you? They claim everyone else is doing this, so why single Texas out? Finally, they'll get angry and tell me I'm rude for discussing this, and continue to re-elect the leaders supporting this. They continue cashing the paychecks from the federal government. Not everyone agrees with me. Here's an email from David Lloyd Morrison. He calls me an ass. Here is his Facebook page. He's a civil servant at the Port Authority of Tacoma, Washington. This is their phone number. If you have any comments for me, you can send them to me at this email address. I'm now asking you, the audience, to boycott anything from Texas. If you're going to take a cruise to the Caribbean, don't board the vessel in Texas. Take a cruise that leaves from Florida. Don't attend a convention here. But mostly, please call the NFL. Tell them Texas is too dangerous for your family. You don't want any Super Bowls or the NFL draft going to Texas. If possible, make the Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans play all their games as away so your family can enjoy them. Please don't let me stand alone. Stand up for these children and be counted. Ask your congressman, should Texas lose federal funding for defrauding and kidnapping? Perhaps even torture and murder? As I say goodbye, I hope I have motivated you to act. I will leave the last word to the victims of CPS, as I thank you for watching Croquis of a Deliberate Crime.
A child, before life removed all the innocence, my father would lift me high.